setting, we are delighted to bring together scholars, policymakers, religious leaders, civil society actors, and practitioners who share a committed to dialogue, mutual respect, and social cohesion. The European Union is home to an extraordinary diversity of cultures, religions, and worldviews. This diversity is not only a social reality, but a defining characteristic of the European project itself. Intercultural and interreligious understanding therefore lies in the heart of the EU foundational values of human rights, democracy, equality, and inclusion. At a time when societies across Europe face polarization, discrimination, and growing mistrust, also worldwide, the need for the meaningful dialogue and cooperative frameworks has never been more urgent. At the outset, we wish to acknowledge the recent attack targeting the Jewish community in Sydney during the celebration of Hanukkah. While this event occurred outside of Europe, it reminds us that religious hatred, anti-Semitism, and violence against communities of any faith know no borders. Our thoughts are with those affected, and we reaffirm our shared commitment to dignity, safety, and mutual respect for all religions and beliefs communities. Today's webinar will explore how EU policies, action plans, and legislative instruments aim to foster tolerance, prevent discrimination, and create sustainable space for dialogue among diverse communities. We will examine major EU initiatives, highlight good practices, and collaborative programs supported by the EU institutions, and reflect on the challenges and opportunities of implementation at the national and local level. We hope that this discussion will not only deepen understanding, but also inspire practical engagement across cultural cooperation. Thank you so much for joining us, and I wish you a fruitful and insightful exchange. This is short announcements for the students of the Faculty of Protestant Theology and Religious Studies. For our academic program, Introduction to Interreligious and Intercultural course set up for this and the next academic year, that this is the last webinar in 2025, and hopefully we continue in 2026 with new topics deepening the foundations for interreligious and intercultural, not only dialogue and understanding, but actually cooperation, where we all have meaningful contributions to give. We have prepared this webinar in cooperation with International Academy for Multicultural Cooperation, and my personal big thanks goes to Audrey Kitagawa. Thank you so much, Audrey, for always being so supportive. I need to say you are in Hawaii, it's 7 a.m. And you look fabulous. I need to give you a compliment as a woman to woman. Waking up so early and being up here with all your team who was helping us to run this webinar in a super professional way. So all my heart with you and your loved ones and your team. So for this evening, you have seen already the biographies of all our distinguished speakers. These are all fantastic experience, peace builders, colleagues and academics who have given and devoted their life to the service of promoting, protecting interreligious dialogue and intercultural cooperation. And I'm really pleased and grateful to each of you that you could be together with us. The audience was able to see the bios, so there is no need me repeating. And also you can Google our lovely guests, and we are very pleased to listen to you tonight and to learn from your wisdom in short presentations and later on in questions and answers. So our first speaker for this evening is the coordinator for the dialogue with religious and non-confessional organizations in the European Commission, Dr. Vincent Depaigne. He has long-standing experience in organizing the dialogue on interreligious and intercultural understanding based on the Article 17 of Treaty of Functioning of the European Union, which invites for open, transparent, and regular dialogue. religious churches, religious communities, philosophical and non-confessional organizations. And I need to say that Vincent, in his capacity as coordinator, it's also very outstanding academic. And you have seen through his bio that he wrote also very interesting documents on this topic. So, Vincent, the floor is yours. How the European Commission is dealing with interreligious and intercultural dialogue based on the Article 17?
Thank you, Elizabeta. I think I'd like to start by saying that I think in the backdrop you may see that we have a Euro Hanukkah ceremony taking place. So it's sort of European session around Hanukkah, where our president is taking, President von der Leyen is taking, have been speaking, and I think it's one of the indication of how we deal and how we take seriously this interreligious dimension of our life of social and religious life in Europe. I would like to offer a number of remarks. I will try to give some few ideas around my experience on the dialogue and offer just maybe some ideas that I would be then happy to develop or answer questions. I mean, first, as Elizabeta mentioned, there is this Article 17 in the treaty. And the idea of dialogue with religious and non-confessional organizations, I always insist on the "and," is an idea which evolved over time. We can trace it back to the 1990s, to the last century, and to the time of European Commission President Jacques Delors, who had first the idea of simply, and I think it was probably over lunch, to gather a number of religious leaders, invite them for a discussion on what the European Union was about, where it was heading. We were after the fall of the Berlin Wall. We were starting to build a more political Europe. It had been more economic at the beginning, and now we were moving towards a more political Europe. So there was this idea from his side to discuss the values and what are the values, what do we talk about when we think about the meaning of Europe. What is really the broader picture? What do we want out of Europe? Of course, Europe started after the World War II, and now we are reminded that Europe is first of all a peace project, and it started as a peace project, and that's really the sort of underlying commitment which has been the success of the European Union, where a war within the European Union is unthinkable today. It's not the same outside our borders, but within the borders of the European Union. And the idea behind the discussion was to say, what are the foundations of the European Union? On what are the foundations on which we will work together? The discussion was renewed in 2000 with a debate around the Constitution for Europe. And the constitutional debate, and this Article 17 is really a response to a constitutional debate around the religious nature of Europe. There were discussions, in particular from some conservative, more particularly from Germany. There were also the Vatican who mentioned that as well. The idea that there should be a mention of the Christian roots of Europe in the Constitution. And there was opposition from the left parties and from some countries like my own France, from Belgium, from some countries objected to that. And the Article 17, which came out in the treaty, was a sort of reflection of the compromise which was found. And the compromise is essentially that we leave it to member states the organization of religion. So it's a national competence. Each member state can organize religion in its own way. And it's a recognition of the pluralism across Europe. And it's a long tradition, in fact. I mean, you can trace it back to the religious wars in Europe. So the idea that you have, and the first dimension of any approach to religion across Europe is pluralism. Of course, it has also freedom of religion. So you have the fundamental rights dimension and the individual rights linked to it. And the third part of this Article 17, the last part of this Article 17, is the idea that there is regular dialogue with religious and with also what we call philosophical and non-confessional organizations, so the humanists, Freemasons. So you have these two aspects to the dialogue, and the first idea of the dialogue is to be inclusive, so that it should cover all major religions. Of course, it's not. It's a European level endeavor. We are not in the business of recognizing each and every religion across Europe. But what we want is to be able to have a genuine engagement with the major religion and the non-confessional groups as well. And the main vehicle from the time of President Delors was to have a high-level annual, and it became a habit, and it's not in the treaties, but there is this sort of tradition, constitutional tradition, one would say, of having a yearly high-level dialogue between commissioners or vice president level and religious leaders, and another with a philosophical non-confessional leader. So you have this sort of yearly high-level meeting. And in between, you have different types of engagement, of discussion with the different actors of the dialogue at different levels. And the aim is really to discuss the main issue facing the European Union. The last dialogue was around addressing the polarization in our societies, the division in our society, in particular hate speech, also the threats around democracy, and the role of social media, artificial intelligence, and new technology. I mean, that's the type of dialogue we have. We've had in the past dialogue around migration. We had discussion also on the external dimension, on Ukraine, on the situation in the Middle East. So it's a quite varied type of dialogue. And I would say just a few words on how I see it. I mean, first, we saw with the instability in the recent years that there is some value. And I remember working on Asia and the Asian dialogue with Asian partners. And the feeling when you met with Asian countries was that the process sometimes mattered more than the substance. And there is some wisdom to it. I mean, that the process itself, the fact that you meet every year, regardless of the situation, in good times or in bad times, is good in itself. I mean, that you establish a regular link, and you establish this, and I think that's very important. And I think in that respect, I would like to commend my two other participants, Imam Pallavicini and Gady Gronich, because I think the Jewish Muslim Leadership Council is a great example of that you establish this sort of regular connection, and that in itself, people may say, okay, you meet, what happens after these meetings? But I see value in the meetings themselves. Another comment I'd like to make is what we see is that usually the interreligious dialogue is taking place in Europe. It's a genuine interreligious dialogue. It's not always easy, but contrary to other parts of the world, you can think of South Asia, Middle East. I mean, at least in Europe, you have this interreligious dialogue. What may be missing sometimes is the engagement between the religious side and the secularist, the non-confessional side. And sometimes, and you see at the end of I mean, around 2015-16, with the terrorist attack, there was a sort of unity among everyone to condemn extremism. With a sort of restart of culture wars, discussion around abortion, for example, you feel that there is a renewal of this divide between the more secularist and the more religious part of the dialogue. And I think that's a challenge, probably because I think all religious leaders acknowledge they live in very secularized societies in Europe, and it's very specifically European, and that you have to address that dimension. I can see, and I think, as a conclusion, I think I'd like to mention the importance of legitimacy. I think for religious actors, it is important to be seen as a legitimate actor by the European Union, by the public actors, and the other way around. I think it's very important for us to receive the support from the religious actors in our work and the input. So I think that's something which is really which remains very, very important in our work. Thank you, Elizabeta. Stop here.
Thank you, Vincent, for this short historical overview. It's not easy to sum up everything in such a short time, as well as the quality and frequency of the engagement, and also underlining what it's lacking, what there is some work to do, and that is actually relationship between interreligious actors and philosophical and non-confessional organizations. And if you remember, actually, we have done that 2 years ago at the Faculty of Protestant Theology. We had different sides. You have been there as interlocutor of both sides, and that was quite interesting debate. So thank you so much for joining us also and this evening. So we go to our next speaker, dear colleague, great academic, great thinker, Gady Gronich. Good evening to you, Gady.
Good evening.
Happy Hanukkah to
Thank
you.
you.
And thank you so much for your time, because you should be very busy now and celebrating, but also working through the Conference of European Rabbis because of what has happened in Sydney. So now my question to you is, how can EU institution better support long-term engagement from the side of combating anti-Semitism in Europe and worldwide? What are your thoughts and deliberations?
I will share with you something that I said a few weeks ago to the commissioner who is responsible for the Jewish affairs, if I want to call it like that. He visited us in Munich, in our headquarters, and I told him very open, you have the right to criticize the politics of the Israeli government. I also have from time to time some criticism to say, and I say it. But at the same time, when you express your criticism about this or other decision of the government, and need to be very clear, and he need to be very, or he or all the political need to be very clear, it should not be against the people who live in Israel. He need in the same statement, in the same interview, in the same press, to make very clear to everyone, the Jewish people who live today in Europe are part of the European society. And we are not part of the decision makers, but we are not part of the decision which is taking place in Jerusalem. And this is very important. And it was not yet done. And this is the problem, because my neighbor, I live in Munich, I forgot to say good evening from Jerusalem. I'm now in Jerusalem. My neighbors where I live in Munich don't understand the difference between the criticize to this Israeli government or to the politics of the Israeli government. If it's right or not, it's not a question now. And us, a Jewish community, Jewish people who live today in Europe, but we are 100% part of the European society. And I will allow myself to say, I think we are the most minority which is integrated in the European society. We live in Europe for the last more than 2,000 years. And this is something which is forgotten from time to time. And it creates, especially since the last 2 years, it creates a very strong move of the citizens, of the people who live in Europe against the Jewish people who live in Europe. But we are part of the society. And I want to say even more clear about myself. I have 2 passports, a German and an Israeli. But when I go to vote, I vote in Germany. I don't vote in Israel. If I could do it. So I think the European Union and the decision maker need to make very clear this difference between criticize the Israeli government and to separate this from the Jewish people who live in Europe, who don't represent or are not part of the decision makers in Israel, and able to protect the Jews who live today in Europe. And this is one of the major problems we are facing today.
Thank you, Gady, for your contribution and a very clear message what it's needed to be done. by European institutions, and I'm very glad that Vincent is there. And also for that, I very strongly believe that all society needs to be engaged, and simply that we are like actually wind into the back in combating anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim hatred, and any sort of hatred against any minority community which is present here in Europe. Because actually, how can we promote democracy, human rights, and rule of law as fundamental values in the European Union and Europe at large? Because when we talk about Council of Europe, if these fundamental values and we live in constant targeting of religious communities simply because there is a very strong lack of understanding of religious freedom in a certain way on the institutional level, but also in the society. And there is a great space actually that religious organizations and faith-based organization can give contribution in actually enlightening society that interreligious cooperation, it's necessary, it's mandatory, simply that we show to the society that we are one, that the humanity matters, and that we all stand for the same fundamental values such as democracy, human rights, and rule of law. So thank you so much for your input. We'll come back to you with other questions. And now we go over to very dear friend and colleague, Imam Yahya Pallavicini, who has multiple functions like chairman of the EULEMA, European Muslim Leadership Council, and vice president of the Italian Islamic Religious Community. He is also one of the leading Italian Muslim figures and scholars. He have wrote numerous documents and papers, and I think one of the masterpiece of his engagement is actually being chairman of this EULEMA network. And also I had a pleasure to cooperate with them in various capacities, and especially on the academic level. And I am very pleased that we on the European level, like we have a conference of European rabbis, that we have a sort of equivalent network like European Muslim Leaders Council. And that is great to have such an important dialogue partner that we on the EU level can turn to. So, dear Imam, thank you so much for joining us this evening. I hope you are joining us from Rome, and we are interested to know how can Muslim communities in Europe contribute to strengthening interreligious solidarity, and how what are your activities vis-a-vis European institutions in combating anti-Muslim hatred and racism that your communities in European Union are also facing? Over to you.
Thank you very much. So good evening from Rome. Yes, you are correct. I'm in Rome, and actually you can see from my room here in the hotel in Rome a picture of the Colosseum behind me, and that shows quite a challenging historical background, because as you can remember, for those who have studied history, it was the place where the Roman Empire were in somehow feeding the lions with the life and the martyrdom of the Christians. So it's quite a challenging conflict between the Roman Empire and the Christian minority in Rome. And so since then, I think we've been trying to develop a better understanding of our role of citizenship, but also of our role as believers. So how to combine without any confusion the identity of citizenship according to the European roots and the Western history and philosophy, and on the other side, how to integrate the true authentic dimension of a specific faith-based doctrine and community, which is Islam. And in this occasion, I'm also very glad to share this panel with you, Elizabeta Kitanovic, dear friend, but also with other very distinguished friends and colleagues. And I'm glad to hear Vincent Depaigne and Gady Gronich, and later on we'll be learning from Teresa Albano and Audrey Kitagawa. From my side, I think to respond to your question, we need to consider the situation when there is a turbulence, when there is a crisis, and when the crisis is going in a different direction, so we have more harmony or more peace. And it's up and down, unfortunately, in Europe. So as a Muslim community, we had to be responsible to try to counter the narrative of radical jihadist terrorist movements, and so to provide the difference that Islam is not the threat, Muslims are not an alienated community among the faith-based citizens in Europe, and we are part of those who want to live in security and want to cooperate with institutions in order to put to jail the criminals and those who are abusing or weaponizing religion. And among this, of course, unfortunately, some criminal movements that pretend to act in the name of Islam. So this is one challenge. And of course, then we have the other challenge, which happens also from foreign issues that are sometimes related. For instance, after the tragedy of the 7th of October, this crime and violent terrorist attack that was against another Jewish religious community, and that endangers all of believers and citizens, because the risk, as it was mentioned by Dr. Depaigne, is the polarization, to try to have a competition of demonization or of victimization. So, the way we have been trying to avoid any victimization process and any demonization process is to concentrate on the universal shared values of brothers and sisters that are believing in different, according to different grammars, but with commonalities and differences on the same dimension of belief in one God. And so an absolute truth according to different rituals, symbols, and doctrines and languages. And so we have to respect and manage unity in diversity, and there is no room for violence, hatred, discrimination, or any kind of attack against any kind of cultural and religious identity. So this is, of course, I mean, speaking to you, Elizabeta, to your students of the theological faculty, it has to be done in three different levels. One level for us, maybe it's easier, it's the theological level, which means to stick to the authentic teachings of religious identity, doctrine, and civilization, to show, according to a comparative religious approach, what is the dialogue in the grammar of theology, what is the mystery and the sacredness of life according to the variety of doctrines. Then you have two other different ways to try to improve it. One is, of course, as it was mentioned by Dr. Vincent Depaigne, the cooperation, the interinstitutional cooperation, which is a very interesting, challenging approach for us that we are theologians, because we have to somehow show and also interpret how a theological grammar and sensitivity meets the secular, universal, institutional, democratic values. And to show to our members of the community that there is no conflicting or overlapping reality that can provide either to go against the democratic values or to pretend to have the ghettos as a solution. So neither ghettoization nor against the European secular law. And the last point, of course, is our work as preachers, as brothers and sisters in the community. Try to avoid hatred, try to avoid the propaganda of some social media and some messages that are only providing fuel for the stigmatization or the speculation of news, data, just to put one against the other and just to provide a false justification for violence or hatred or even terrorism and murder. So this, I think, is the way we have to try to do. And as it was mentioned, thanks also to the support of KAICIID, we provided to have this joint cooperation before the 7th of October and after the 7th of October with the Conference of European Rabbis and establishing the Muslim Jewish Leaders Council. And it has had recently, this year, the historical meeting of the two co-chairs, Chairman Rabbi Goldschmidt and Mufti Grabus from Sarajevo in Lisbon at the headquarters of KAICIID in order to improve and develop our engagement, but also to adapt it according to new challenges in society, according to culture, but also with institutions, according to policies. So this, I think, is a concrete example, and also the investment in the Youth Ambassadors Program is also an intergenerational process that is ongoing. And this is something that also the CER has been developing according to intra-religious programs. So this is, I think, the best way. And just to conclude, if I may, making reference to what you mentioned on this other, unfortunately, tragedy in Sydney, where not only we had the loss of several persons who were worshipping according to one of these blessed evenings of Hanukkah, also a rabbi, Eli Schlanger, has unfortunately was murdered. But it is interesting that there was an Australian citizen that was active part of trying to go against one of these murderers. And I think this is in somehow symbolically what we have to try to provide to have a preventive action with institutions, with theology, and with our community, but also to react when we see violence that is going against our brothers and sisters with no justification. Thank you again, and I'll be following and available for any development.
Thank you so much, Imam Yahya, for your valuable contribution and emphasizing how much actually comparative theology and its analysis is important for the students to continue to write the master thesis and do the doctoral research or postdoctorate studies in this topic. And thank you so much for underlining how much it's important in civil society to avoid this demonization of people of particular religious communities and so on, and to mention that Australian citizen that you were referring is Ahmed. And belonging to the Muslim community, Islamic community there in Australia. So it shows very clearly that people are against, in general, any terrorist attacks of such a kind, and that we all, as united, as you have mentioned, can combat these terrible stereotypes and polarization which are preventing social cohesion in Europe, but also on the global level as well. And thank you so much for actually making great introduction to Teresa Albano, to the Senior Program Manager, KAICIID. She has done absolutely tremendous work in organizing European Policy Dialogue Forum together with her colleagues. Teresa have been doing lots of work actually to bridging the divide, but also to the different topics like climate change and other topics, discussing and promoting clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. And there was a recent European Policy Dialogue Forum, and I am truly interested. Teresa, how did it go, the European Policy Dialogue Forum? What are your lessons learned from that meeting, and how did that meeting actually responded and operationalize EU values of dialogue and inclusion in the fragile and polarized context through the European Policy Dialogue Program? Because as Imam Yahya referred actually to the KAICIID support, which is already there for a few years, supporting Muslim Jewish Council, which is a very valuable initiative, one of the most important initiatives in Europe actually that we have on the interfaith level, thanks to KAICIID. And Teresa, over to you. What are your conclusions and lessons learned, how we do advance as intergovernmental organization, interfaith and intercultural dialogue?
Thank you so much, Elizabeta, and it's a real pleasure to see many friends around this table, and also platforms that have been created and supported by KAICIID. But maybe let me just introduce the organization, because sometimes KAICIID is not really well known around, and considering that we have a student audience, maybe this could be interesting for them as well. So the King Abdullah Center for Interreligious and Intercultural Dialogue was established back in 2012 after a symbolic encounter. The symbolic encounter was between King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia and Pope Benedict XVI, and they met in 2007 as custodians of the sacred sites for Islam and Christianity. From this initial impulse, the KAICIID was established with a unique dual governance structure, and this could be particularly interesting for students and also for those dealing with international law and international organization, because KAICIID is composed by a council of parties, so gathering states as normal intergovernmental organizations like the United Nations and other organizations. But on the other side, there is a board of directors that gathers 9 religious leaders from main religions, and particularly Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Buddhism, and Hindu. So this dual governance really makes KAICIID a unique organization, and it legitimizes the organization to promote its mission, which is to support and foster interreligious dialogue as a key method to promote peace, peaceful coexistence, and mutual understanding across policymakers and secular institutions and religious communities. So we are at the crossroad of secularism and religiosity, spirituality, which is a challenging space. Vincent Depaigne wrote a book on this, actually. It's a challenging space. And this is, and exactly because it is a challenging space, it's a particularly generative space. And the European Policy Dialogue Forum is one of these spaces in which we bring together policymakers, religious leaders, non-believers, and we try our best to keep always 30% share of young people below the age of 30, and also high-level participation of women who are often underrepresented both in the secular and in the religious institutions. So this year we gathered in Geneva and we discussed social cohesion and climate justice, which, and again, at the intersection, because those communities that are particularly excluded and marginalized, and I am referring also to religious minorities, are those most affected by the consequences and the impact of climate change and environmental degradation. So, lessons. Let me share first my impression when I entered the room. So more than 120 people from more than 30 countries, also outside Europe this time. People really came also from Africa, from Asia, from the Middle East, in order to observe how, at the European level, we try to foster and nurture a dialogue across differences. We were honored that the Vice President of the European Parliament responsible for the application of the Article 17, who is the counterpart of Vincent Depaigne, she sent a video message. Unfortunately, the date was not suitable for her to be in presence, in person, in Geneva. But we also enjoyed a video message from Michaela Mua, who is the EU coordinator on anti-racism. And, you know, we also learned that growing inequalities, and we also listened to the International Labour Organization, which also produces the report on social justice. We also got the impression that we should rethink the same concept of minority and majority in light of increasing inequalities. In a continent and in a world where more and more a narrow percentage of individuals hold an increasing share of resources, then really we are all together in this. All together across differences. We are all that majority at risk of getting more and more excluded. So this, again, generated a new perception of who the other is. The other is me at the end of the day, because if I don't protect and preserve the rights of the other, I jeopardize my own rights. And we learned this through a very valuable example put forward by a European trade union that explained from an economic perspective how social dumping can really represent the way how we are all interconnected. We are all together in the challenge of preserving the environment and making our societies equitable and just. And this is the enabling environment, equitable societies and inclusive societies that KAICIID really works so much for. We at the Europe region, we do our best with our limited resources, and I'm so happy that both Gady and Imam Pallavicini, they mentioned the Muslim Jewish Leadership Council, and Vincent as well, because this is exactly one of the most important initiatives that we support, together with the Ambassadors Program, young people below the age of 30. Tomorrow here in Rome, they will be at the Vatican, where we are organizing a roundtable on religion and diplomacy, where we will discuss the contribution of religious leaders to a constructive and inclusive diplomatic capital, a capital that can help the diplomacy of hope, going beyond divisions and beyond the perception of the other as the enemy, as Gady was actually saying. We need to really complement the visions of secular institutions and traditional multilateralism with the wisdom of spiritual and religious traditions. It's a process. It's a process. It's a process that goes through a number of challenges, but also opportunities. Allow me to say that the challenges offer always the opportunity to reinforce our dialogue. We need to be there, to stay there, taking really example and inspiration from the Muslim Jewish Leadership Council. Next year, they will celebrate the 10th anniversary, and we will do it in Strasbourg in February, hopefully hosted by the Council of Europe. So there is a lot that we are working together towards, and I'm really happy that we are growingly cooperating with EU institutions to turn the recommendations and insights of what we discuss in the conference rooms into actual initiatives and actions. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa, for the all good work that you do, and thank you for presenting KAICIID and its initiatives. I just need to remind our students that in our library, they may find KAICIID material, trainings that you have developed, and also books and publications that they're, and of course we encourage them also. And this evening with a special input from Teresa, that they go there and look into this material and follow very closely the developments for the 10th anniversary of the Muslim Jewish Council next year, 2026. And also, I'm very pleased, Teresa, how actually you gave in your input complementation to the actually all the processes in the EU. So that's very important, actually, that we promote all together as intergovernmental, religious sector, civil society, academia, social inclusion. Thanks so much for all the work. And last but not least, our distinguished speaker also for this evening, it's Audrey Kitagawa. Audrey has multiple functions. You will see very soon in the chat. Just to mention that she is president and founder of International Academy for Multicultural Cooperation, which is our partner for this course on Introduction to Interreligious and Intercultural Dialogue, and as well president of the Light of Awareness International Spiritual Family. And she has many more functions. I need to say that I am very pleased that, and I'm very also aware that it's very early for her, that she woke up very early this morning. It is 7 o'clock and maybe 49 minutes a.m. On her side of the road in Hawaii. So Audrey, thank you so much for it. And you have heard from the EU perspective, what kind of challenges do we face, as well as of opportunities on the policy level, on the cooperation level, and so on. But you could see also amazing willingness from our colleagues, Gady Gronich and Imam Yahya Pallavicini, and good synergy in their cooperation. I need to say, you really make impossible possible. And I am very pleased every time when I see two of you. I know that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. So I am very pleased actually that both of you could be tonight with us in this evening. And of course with Vincent, who is there from the European Commission, who is underpinning all good work. And of course, Teresa developing the policy, you know, related to the EU standards. That actually we listen, Audrey, from you, what kind of engagements are present at the UN level, because actually you have been a long-standing partner of the multiple programs of the EU agencies. You have helped, you know, to children, to families in different capacities, strengthening the children's rights. And in many talks, we are aware today that there is lots of polarization and so on. And as spiritual mother, you have so much to offer from spiritual and theological point but also from the advocacy point of view on behalf of the International Academy for Multicultural Cooperation. So, dear Audrey, over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Elizabeta, for this invitation to participate in this very important discussion. And I really appreciate hearing what the panelists have shared about the EU policies and frameworks for, interactions and understanding to promote the interreligious understanding and the mechanisms created by the EU. But you've asked me also to specifically share about the United Nations and how it provides access to religious organizations and encourages interreligious understanding and participation. And there is this some kind of, belief that it is very difficult for religious faith communities to access the UN. But I also wanted to give some background. And preceding the European Union was the United Nations, which is the leading multicultural international organization in contemporary times. And it is comprised of 193 member states, which include all of the 27 countries which comprise the EU. And the UN was established after 2 world wars in 1945 and really has been a model for multicultural or multilateral organizations that share its goals of peace, security, and cooperation among nations. The EU, which began with economic goals, evolved into a political union with emphasis on human rights and the rule of law, values that are deeply embedded in the UN Charter. And for both organizations, the value of collaboration with multicultural and interreligious organizations to protect peace and human rights are quite clear. So the foundational EU legal documents referenced by our speakers, the Treaty on European Union and Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union, drew on the guiding principles of the United Nations as a frame of reference for international understanding and partnerships. And Article 3 of the TEU specifically states that the EU must adhere to the strict observance of the development of international law, including respect for the principles of the United Nations Charter. So this is a very important foundational document that becomes the paradigm for other multilateral organizations. And in its article outlining foreign policy, the TEU commits to promote multilateral solutions to common problems in the framework of the United Nations. So the EU and the UN are both committed to structured avenues that enable religious and cultural actors to make important contributions to the work of both organizations. So in the normative frameworks established by the UN, which have laid the groundwork for institutional dialogues, the UN Charter and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights establish principles of dignity, non-discrimination, and peaceful cooperation, and enshrined freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. So in 1966, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights defined states' legal obligations as including freedom of religion or belief, freedom of expression, and the prohibition of incitement to discrimination, hostility, or violence. And in the 1981, the Declaration on the Elimination of All Forms of Intolerance and Discrimination based on religion or belief further elaborated on these principles and is considered the first international soft law instrument focusing on religious intolerance. So the EU's TEU and TFEU have also established core commitments to human dignity, equality, and cultural and religious diversity, and institutionalized these values. So both the United Nations and the EU have put in place structures that allow the interreligious and intercultural dialogue to really thrive. And so beyond the normative frameworks, however, there are also similarities, though not parallel structures, between the mechanisms of the UN and the EU in how they support interreligious dialogue. So the TEU Article 17 in particular commits to open, transparent, and regular dialogue with religious and non-confessional and philosophical actors through avenues such as meetings, dialogues, and formal contact. And we've heard this morning, a huge panoply of all of these activities. The Economic and Social Council, or ECOSOC, is the very heart of the UN system to advance economic, social, and environmental development. And this is a gateway for UN partnership and participation. And it is the main structural mechanism that gives religious and interfaith actors formal and recurring access to UN policy discussions. So with consultative status, organizations can attend meetings, submit written statements, deliver presentations, organize and attend parallel events, and participate in debates, dialogues, and discussions, of which it is a very vibrant community that we have engaging with the UN. Because ECOSOC has taken a leading role in identifying emerging challenges and promoting innovation, including implementation of the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, consultative status is a very powerful avenue towards participation in global issues. The UN Alliance of Civilizations, or UNOC, the UN's premier global platform for intercultural dialogue, specifically addresses the roots of polarization between societies and cultures. And the programs include empowering dialogue and interfaith networks, a project that equips faith-based organizations, including young people, with communication tools and strategies to help their communities counter sectarian violence. And while UNAOC is not structured like Article 17, it does provide recurring opportunities for religious actors to engage in issues relating to peace building and address other global concerns such as extremism and conflict. And the UN Interagency Task Force on Religion and Development is also another powerful mechanism. And it was established in 2010 as a platform for knowledge exchange and management, capacity building, system-wide guidance and oversight regarding engagement with faith-based civil society actors. So while the primary purpose of the Interagency Task Force on Religion and Development is knowledge sharing and engagement with religious organizations, its Multi-Faith Advisory Council, established in 2018, is a very unique outlet for faith-based partners to provide on-the-ground perspectives to the UN on matters such as human rights, peace and security, and sustainable development. So the Multi-Faith Advisory Council is comprised of more than 40 faith-based organizations representing diverse traditions. And it is an example of interfaith dialogue, collaboration, and meaningful contribution to UN policymaking. So the Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Religion or Belief is an independent expert tasked by the Human Rights Council with identifying existing and emerging obstacles to freedom of religion or belief and presenting recommendations to overcome these obstacles. And the rapporteur undertakes fact-finding, country visits, monitors violations, submits annual reports, engages with religious communities, and receives concerns from individuals or organizations. And its mandate strengthens the global conditions such as freedom of belief and protection from discrimination that make interreligious dialogue possible. So the UN supports religious and cultural participation through many avenues, through the Faith for Rights framework, the Rabat Plan of Action, World Interfaith Harmony Week, and numerous UN agencies such as UNFPA, UNDP, UNICEF, World Health Organization, the UN Office of Genocide Prevention, and UN Women also create huge spaces for consultative and dialogue with religious actors at national and global levels. And UNESCO is another key agency that defines intercultural dialogue is a process undertaken to realize transformative communication across cultures and identities. And that is exactly what is needed in our global landscape today. Communication that has the power to reshape understanding. So thank you so very much. And of course, there's a whole long list that I won't have time to go through, but I just want to mention the UN Environment Programme's Interfaith Rainforest Initiative and the Faith for Earth Coalition. So thank you so much, Elizabeta.
Thank you so much, Audrey, for this extensive list where to go and what to do on the UN level, and how we actually can run comparative programs on the EU and UN level, simply to do multiplications of great initiatives on all different levels, from local to regional to European and international. And thank you so much for all these ideas for the NGOs, what and how to do. So as we are a little bit running out of time, I have prepared like one question for each of the panelists. And after that, we are going to have 2 minutes each for the conclusion, after we go on questions and answers mode. And I will start first listing the questions to give you a little bit of time that you can prepare yourself answer. So as Vincent was our first speaker, I have one question for Vincent. And this is a question related to the EU funding, because EU, it's very known that it has lots of programs for supporting different spheres and sectoral policies of the EU, from the research, from the academic research, to supporting civil society initiatives based on promoting democracy, human rights, rule of law as fundamental values, because we have the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights, and we know very well that the economic and trade agreements needs to be based in accommodating actually human rights clause in itself. And there are also lots of separate dialogues, human rights-based dialogues, that European External Action Service is dealing with. Teresa mentioned that tomorrow there is a dialogue on religion and diplomacy, and European External Action Service has also done also lots of work for many years in this field. So I'm glad to see that this area it's developing, etc. So that would be one question: where to apply? What would you and how would you encourage religious-based organization to compete for the EU funding? And the question is there ever going to be maybe some special program where religious organizations can be distinguished from other, let's say, civil society organizations when applying to the funding, or the rules are going to remain the same for anyone who is competing for the EU funding? A question for Gady Gronich, CEO of Conference of European Rabbis, and our vice president of COREIS, Imam Yahya Pallavicini. From your point of view and all work you have been doing for years, combating anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim hatred, you have been very exposed, speaking to public, bringing the message to different audiences, not only in the European Union or in Europe, but also worldwide in different continents and so on. What kind of support do you need from the European institutions? What kind of support do you need from different stakeholders in the society? What kind of cooperation do you expect, for example, also from academia and so on? Because we have students who are going to write master thesis on interreligious, intercultural dialogue, different perspectives and so on, challenges and opportunities and so on. So what would be message on your end? For Teresa, as you're doing so much important work in different policies, I mean, KAICIID does amazing work. You have so many working areas that you are covering, not only in Europe, but also worldwide through the ambassadors and fellowship networks that you have developed. How do you see the future of development of the European Policy Dialogue Program, Teresa, that you're personally developing in, and you have invested so much energy, really bringing the voice of KAICIID also to the European Union through different channels and different programs. And last but not least, the question for Audrey: what ethical responsibilities do institutions have when communities experience fear during sacred religious observances? So, to come back to the answers, Vincent, are you ready to chip in for an answer?
Yeah, of course. I mean, the short answer, not to have too long answer, is that there is no link between the Article 17 dialogue and funding. I mean, the Article 17 dialogue is not about funding, it's about policy dialogue, it's about, so it's really a political exchange. It is not a lobbying exercise. I mean, sometimes people say, okay, it's like other lobbies, the religious or non-confessional lobbies. I mean, they are lobbies. And why not? I mean, I think religious and non-confessional organizations are also perfectly legitimate actors to lobby the institution, to have their own interests, like everyone. But that's not the purpose of the Article 17 dialogue. Of course, it does not prevent to have specific discussion on religious matters and you mentioned the fight against anti-Semitism, Gady Gronich, I mean, the fight against anti-Muslim hatred. So these are issues on which we have a policy, and the commissioner in charge of the dialogue is also the same commissioner, Commissioner Brunner, who is in charge of anti-Semitism and the fight against anti-Muslim hatred. So there is a coherence behind that. And then, of course, you have different EU policies where the religious element can be important, the protection of public spaces, of places of worship, the fight against radicalization, the fight against hate speech. We have human rights programs, so we have different programs. And here, I wanted to, didn't mention Teresa Albano, your contribution, but I think KAICIID is actually doing interreligious work. At EU level, we don't really have dedicated funding for interreligious work. We can fund it indirectly through, the fight against hate speech. Again, projects can be, of course, interreligious and they can apply for EU funding. And more importantly, we didn't talk a lot about it, the external dimension. In external funding, we have much more interreligious funds because of the competencies also, because outside the EU, promoting freedom of religion, promoting interfaith dialogue is definitely a new competence, where internally, as I said, this is first and foremost for member states. It is strictly religious matters dimension. So here is my answer.
Thank you so much, Vincent. This is very, very important message for all people who are listening to us, not only in Brussels, but all around the world, because we have about 102 people at the moment who are in our Zoom meetings. So thank you so much for that. And thank you so much for pointing out where to look. And that is into actually external dimension, where actually this religious freedom aspect is far more, let's say, developed in terms of possibilities for the EU programs where one could apply as interfaith organizations and so on. We go to Gady Gronich. Gady, what would be your message?
Before I start with the message, I allow myself 2 minutes to give some remarks about what I was saying before here, if you allow me. I learned from Audrey, who I met today for the first time, it's a big honor for me, about this advisory council of religious leaders who are working together in the UN. I think we are missing this in Europe, if I want to be very open and very honest. We don't have this advisory council who are working close with the European Commission. And I really believe that the European Commission needs to be in more instance or effective contact with us, to listen to us, to get maybe some ideas from us, or to get advice from us. not to speak about us, but to speak with us. And I think there's a big difference there that I'm missing there. There was a second issue that we have many times the word religious freedom, which is very crucial for the Jewish community and for the Muslim community. And I want to give you a very short experience that I had one day in the European Parliament, as I'm coming there quite a lot. And I had one day, it was in the time when the discussion about kosher halal slaughtering in Belgium was still in process before the law came out. I was in a day, I met, I'd say carefully, 10 to 12 different members of the European Parliament from different parties. And my point of discussion was the question of religious freedom. And I heard the same answer from all the members of the parliament that I met, from going more or less all the parties through. In a way, they will say, Mr. Gronich, I don't understand why you complain. We have religious freedom in Europe. After hearing this for the third time, I understood for myself, where's the problem? Yes, we have religious freedom, but you want to tell how to practice this. This is a problem. This is the main problem. So I think there need to be a much more exchange, listen to each other, together looking for solutions or for ways or ideas how to solve difficulties in the European frame, in the European rule, but also to take into consideration our culture, our history, our tradition. Again, according to the European law. Nobody wants to do against this something. Going back to the question, I think one of the things that I would expect, we spoke about before, about founding. I don't want to mention founding now. I just want to say that from the point of view of the Jewish community, and I want to be very open, since October 7, 2023, there is a break, if I'm calling it like that, or ice between and what we call interfaith dialogue. There is a problem there. I mean, we cannot say that everything is business as usual, because it's not. And I think the European Commission need to take the initiative to help us to build trust again. We need first to build trust. Then we go in the programs, then we go on the project, then we go to the founding. We are not too far away from any founding opportunities to think about this. I'm sorry, that's what I mean. We need first of all to build trust. And this is, I think, our first step after these two years now, since October 23, and both sides, the Muslim community, the Jewish community, we have things that disturb us. And I don't want to judge any side now. Maybe everyone, what he's saying, there's something true inside there, or more than something true. There is a lack of trust in the moment. And I think the Commission need to take this as a task to help us to build trust again. From there, we go to the next steps. What should be done? What could we do together? What should we do together? Or what should we do separate? I can just tell you now, I cannot go too much into it. I'm since July 2024 in several informal meetings, informal. There's no camera, there's no media, there's no statement, there's no audience, there's nobody there. With key leaders of Muslim communities, with those who have never had the mind to sit with me before October 7. I don't speak after October 7, before. And I told the commissioner who came to visit me in Munich. So there is a process, but we need the umbrella, we need the platform, or we need the possibility to continue to build this trust. And I think this is something where the EU need to be part of this, because I think we need help from outside. I'm not sure we will succeed. We will succeed even I would say I'm a good friend with Imam Yahya. We meet each other, we speak each other, but they're different. So call it now a mediator, call it now support. I don't know what the word is, not the right one, but something need to be done because it's not going the right way now. And maybe the last thing that I would like to add to the question, what could be done? I think that also the aspect of the education is an important part of this. It's a very important part of this. And this is something where I think, especially the Commission, need to take a leadership on this and to give the push and the support for the education. If I say it from a Jewish perspective, there is a brainwash outside against us. A mega brainwash. It's not only the media, it's starting from the school, from the family at home, from the neighbor, from the working place, and so on and so on and so on. Just to give you a feeling, Jewish people who live today in Europe, to make clear, sorry, somebody's calling me now in between. You are with me? I didn't lose you. Okay, sorry. I got a call in the meantime. I'm afraid. Sydney was now the highlight, if I call it from the process. But Jewish people are today afraid. And this is something that needs to be understood in Brussels, and Brussels need to help us to overcome this situation.
Thank you so much, Gady, for this input, very valuable input. And really, I like when you speak from your heart, because then, of course, we can see what really what needs to be done, what is possible to be done, and readiness from all communities that there is a change for better coexistence, coherence, understanding, and as you mentioned, education, crucial. Definitely. This is why we are doing this at the Protestant Theological Faculty, simply to have the insights from religious communities and so on, because we are also doing theological research, and also our students are very much encouraged to dig deeper, you know, like into the holy books and what Imam Pallavicini mentioned, comparative analysis on this issue. So thank you so much from that and from the task that you have giving us here in Brussels. So, dear Imam Pallavicini, I'm very conscious that you will have to leave 7:30. I just need to check. Are you still there?
Yes, I'm here.
Fantastic.
Briefly, I can contribute to your question. Well, I think that, of course, the main situation is cooperation, is to turn the interreligious and interinstitutional dialogue into an interreligious and interinstitutional cooperation. So we need, of course, to meet, to talk, but also to work together. And this is the more complex situation, because there we have methodologies, approaches, and languages that are different. And so the danger is that some religious leaders pretend from the politicians that they become theologians. And on the other side, some of our religious leaders pretend that the politicians become preachers. We have to keep each one our own role and learn to work together. And even the variety of languages of different religions and of different political parties. There is left, right, center, and there is Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam, and Judaism, and Christianity. So this is one first challenge to be managed. The other one is that, of course, not any theologian or not any political leader can be automatically with the good skills for this process. So we need actually to train religious leaders, and if I may say, political leaders, that can bridge the two languages and sensitivities with an open-minded, clear interpretation. And this is not easy. Because of course the challenges is security or profit or domestic priorities at the national level or foreign trade or whatever. So of course the secular institutions need to manage several priorities, but I agree with our dear friend Gady Gronich that I actually mentioned this in the last meeting of the high-level meeting in Brussels, where if we could have an informal advisory interreligious council where the politicians can be more proactively involved in sharing some of their concerns on the civil society, I think this could be a very interesting occasion. The last point is in terms of academic and education. Let us be very careful, especially for Islam, that sometimes Muslims and Islam is in the laboratory. Which means that we are creating an artificial moderate Islam, which of course can be better than the radical jihadist interpretation. But again, that's another artificial intelligence. So what we need to find is really reliable, serious, competent, experienced religious leaders that are open to the secular priorities, goals, and language. And that in that way, I think we can have a shared common engagement and not the creation of a artificial moderate so-called Islam, or to speak of religions only with the experts and not with their legitimate representatives. Just think of Christianity. You have Orthodox Christianity, Catholic Christianity, Protestant Christianity. These are three different interpretations theologically, but also spiritually, but also as a civic engagement. And this is part of the complexity, but it's part of the richness of Christian community. And it's the same for Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, and Hinduism, just to mention some of these. So there are these complexities, and this needs to be managed. But the goal, I mean, the key is shared responsibility and shared engagement.
Thank you so much, dear Imam. This is why I'm very grateful, because you're always insisting on this expertise. And this is wonderful to hear from you. And this is where I'm really grateful and pleased that you have created this amazing EULEMA network, that you have been the engine, the force, the encouragement, where actually male and female theologians with a strong Islamic proper background actually can engage in any debate with European institutions or with civil society and so on. And this is actually the reference group where actually all of those who wants to engage with Islam on the EU level, or let's say on European level, can come to you and simply look for the competent people on various let's say topics that they would like to discuss on the basis of the Islamic theology, which is very, very important, and not to create something just by itself, as you say, okay, artificial. And I'm very pleased that you and Gady agree for this advisory council that also would be beneficial for both religious communities as a support and so on. And of course, there is a way to go. And I guess that would be both of your wishes for 2026 for the upcoming year. I see the nodding from both sides. All right. So thank you so much. And we go to Teresa. Teresa, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So actually, Vincent, Imam Pallavicini, and Gady, they just stole my keywords, because my keywords would have been shared responsibilities, trust, and platform. KAICIID is and offers itself as the platform to bridge the gap between religious leaders and policymakers. We were established exactly for this purpose. So we offer the ePDF already. But if you ask me the wish for the future of the ePDF is that we multiply the ePDF in different formats so that we offer that informal, safe setting that religious leaders and policymakers need in order to discuss sometimes uncomfortable issues. But in order to do this, we need to build trust, Gady. I fully second and support your vision, which means through incremental steps, we come together in order to discuss first what unites us and then what really is something that represents a challenge. So the future for me is to continue offering Vincent roundtables in Brussels as we did in 2024, but maybe more focused, maybe more aligned to the needs and the requests of both policymakers and religious leaders. We have Strasbourg next year in February, but also we are going to organize 2 events at the European Parliament. So we have multiple opportunities to really identify the most suitable way forward. But we need to definitely understand that this is a shared responsibility. I'm working very much in terms of also providing funding, but not only from KAICIID, but also facilitating the platforms that KAICIID supports to access EU funding through different programs. So last year, we facilitated the MJLC Ambassadors Program to be part of a bigger network to access the SERV funds, one of the EU funding for human rights and for the protection of human rights. And we do it through networks of cities. We established an informal working group of city networks because cohesion and inclusion is built at local level. Then we work also at regional level with big institutions like the European Union and the Council of Europe. But coexistence and the sense of belonging is built at local level where education is fundamental. And I absolutely support what the previous speakers said. But again, we need to also understand that education goes very much through informal channels and social media. So wait for me in 2026. I will come to you with a beautiful proposals. Let's see if we all agree in implementing this proposal together. Vincent, this is a proposal for you as well. So yes, we are trying to do our best in order to intercept all these needs. We are a small team, only 4 people, but you know, when the passion and the belief that we are doing the right thing is there, we really are able to multiply our energies. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa, for this lovely announcement for exciting 2026. I'm really looking forward to it. What we are going to see in the next year. And I'm very much aware we basically have 1 minute, but of course we're going to prolong for a few minutes. Audrey, over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Elizabeta. You raise a very important question, and that is the ethical responsibilities of institutions. But also, I want to frame it as for individuals as well, for that they have towards communities that experience fear during sacred religious observances. You know, we have a vibrant international laws, covenants, treaties, etc. And like, for example, in Australia, they have one of the strictest gun laws, but the enforcement of it comes, usually it's governments that hold the moral ground to create legislation that actually seeks to protect its citizens from, any kind of crimes, whether it's hate crimes, fraud, etc., etc. So therefore, it is very important to have leaders elected who are of, shall I say, enlightened consciousness that are clear on the rules of law and the important international frameworks that support human rights, democracy, and the rule of law, and do not act in contravention of these rules of law, and the importance of having this understanding of collaboration, cooperation, and appreciating the diversity that exists in our entire world, to the multicultural, multiracial, multi-religious, context within which we live. So it is the responsibility the international organizations have created these valuable frameworks, and it is the political will of the countries that belong to these international organizations to be able to effectuate the policies and implement these vibrant, treaties, covenants, etc. So the leadership is extremely important. So in democratic societies, our vote counts. So that is part of our personal responsibility to exercise our democratic right to vote, and vote for leaders who understand, and support these important values. And also for the individual to be able to take responsibility, not only to be reactive to what our political leaders, our governments, et cetera, are doing, but also for us to be able to practice our own responsibility for our own, thoughts, our own speech, and our own actions to ensure that we ourselves are behaving within an ethical framework, and that we do not commit to violence in our thoughts, in our speech, and in our actions, because that important saying, peace on earth begins with me, and that is absolutely true. So we each have important responsibility as global citizens, as members of our families, communities, and the world, to be able to mind our own ethics. Okay, so thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Audrey, for these valuable remarks. It's always important to see and to end up the webinar with a light to the world and the right direction where we are supposed to go in the future, and closing 2025 and going forward in 2026, hoping with the best wishes that it's going to be a better year than the previous one. I will just go closely with a word of thanks to conclude this webinar of this evening and last for this academic year 2025. And big thanks to all of you, to all the great speakers, to Vincent Depaigne from the European Commission, from Gady Gronich from the Conference of European Rabbis, CEO, to Imam Yahya Pallavicini, who is always supportive and a great theologian, to Teresa, who is making impossible to possible with her efforts, really gathering everybody around the world and bringing people together. And I hope, Teresa, that in the future we will see even stronger cooperation also with the Conference of European Rabbis, and also EULEMA network under the KAICIID, but also here in the European Union, strongly advocating for religious freedom, for education, what Imam Yahya mentioned, good theology, and what Audrey mentioned, like with lots of light and ethical responsibility. So thank you so much for being tonight here with us. Also, special thanks goes to the colleagues from the G20 Interfaith Forum. Audrey, as you and myself, we are members of the advisory council or panel. I need to say that we had a president and vice president called Darame, Katri Marshall, and lots of colleagues, Brian Adams, Sherry Steiner, being here tonight with us with a great support to all our endeavors. So thank you so much to everybody, and big thanks also to the very professional team. Of course, those in the audience couldn't see this amazing team of Zoom technicians, top professionals, making sure that everything runs in a super professional way. Thanks to Audrey being here with us and with her great blessings and support. So all the best for the 2026. See you next year.
Okay.